Michael Jordan had 6 championship rings, 5 Most Valuable Player awards, and his own name printed on the deed of the building he walked into that night. He could have come through the front doors of Crown Point Arena any evening he wanted. Full security, a lane cleared through the crowd, the whole city turning its head to look. Instead, on a cold Thursday in late November, he came in through a quiet service entrance on the east side of the building, a plain grey hoodie zipped halfway up, a dark cap pulled low, no entourage, no announcement. He wanted 2 hours of silence and a basketball game. He wanted to be nobody for a little while. That was the entire point. What he did not plan for that night was to be told, inside a room he owned, that he did not belong there. He did not plan for a man in a tailored suit to look him up and down, register the plain hoodie and the worn sneakers, and decide in less than 3 seconds that Michael Jordan was a problem to be removed. He did not plan to stand quietly at the edge of a marble lounge, while wealthy strangers turned to watch a stranger get embarrassed. And he absolutely did not plan for a single mother in a pressed uniform, $11 an hour, a boy at home she was raising alone, to be the only person in that entire building who looked at him and simply saw a human being who deserved a chair and a kind word. Her name was Simone Carter. 90 seconds after she showed him that small ordinary kindness, she was fired for it. She had no idea who he was, and that exact detail, that she helped a man she believed to be nobody, is what changed everything. Stay with me until the end. Because what Michael Jordan did next, quietly, without a single word to a reporter, is the kind of story that never makes the headlines. It should. Simone Carter had been awake since 5:15 that morning, and not by choice. Her alarm did not wake her. Her son did. Andre was 8 years old, and he had a cough that had been hanging on for a week, a dry, rattling thing that came in the small hours and pulled him up out of sleep and pulled her up right along with him. She sat on the edge of his bed in the dark and rubbed slow circles on his back until the coughing settled. And then she stayed a while longer because that was what you did, and because she was already awake, and because there was no point pretending the day had not started. Their apartment sat off Sugar Creek Road on the north side of Charlotte, 2 rooms and a kitchen where the faucet dripped no matter how hard she cranked it. She had put a folded dish towel under the drip, so the sound would not keep Andre up. On the refrigerator there were 3 photographs held by magnets shaped like little suns. Andre at 5, missing a front tooth, grinning like he had invented grinning. Andre at 7, holding a certificate from school for perfect attendance. And an older picture, softer at the edges, of Simone and her own mother on a porch in a town 2 hours east, back when things had a little more room in them. Simone was 36. She had been raising Andre by herself since he was 2. His father was a name she did not say out loud anymore, and a check that had stopped coming a long time ago. She had learned, the way people in her position learn, to build a life inside a very narrow margin. Rent was $840 a month. Andre's after-school program was another $210. His inhaler, the one the doctor said he needed for the cough that kept coming back, ran $41 even with the discount card, and $41 was not nothing. $41 was a week of groceries if she was careful, and she was always careful. The job at Crown Point Arena was supposed to help. She worked premium hospitality, which was a polite way of saying she carried trays and folded napkins and smiled at people who did not always remember she was there. The pay was $11 an hour, plus a share of a tip pool that some nights was generous and some nights was insulting. She had been there 4 months. She was good at it. She remembered which regulars liked sparkling water and which ones pretended to. She remembered names. She had a way of reading a room, of knowing before anyone said a word that people needed something, that a guest was about to be difficult, that a co-worker was one small kindness away from tears in the walk-in cooler. Her mother had been the same way. It was the kind of gift that did not show up on a paycheck. Her supervisor 2 levels up was a man named Preston Vale, and Preston Vale was a particular kind of person. He was 43, immaculate, the sort of man who had his suits taken in, and his teeth whitened, and his opinions about other people set in concrete. His title was Director of Guest Experience, and he had built his whole identity around a single idea, which was that Crown Point Arena, and specifically the members' lounge on the club level called the Crown Club, was a place for a certain kind of person. He could tell you that kind of person on sight. He believed, deeply and without shame, that his job was to keep everyone else out. Preston was charming to the people he wanted to charm. He remembered the anniversaries of the season ticket holders, who paid for the corner suites. He sent handwritten notes to the executives who leased the glass boxes above centre court, and he was cold, in a smooth, practised way, to everyone he had decided did not matter, which included most of his staff and all of the guests who arrived without the right watch or the right shoes. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He had perfected a way of making a person feel small with nothing more than a tilt of his head and a thin, patient smile. Simone had watched him do it a dozen times. She had watched him turn away an older couple in their Sunday best because they had wandered up to the wrong level looking for their grandson. She had watched him embarrass a young man who had saved for a year to bring his father to a game because the young man asked a question in a voice that shook. She had learned to stand very still when Preston was working, the way you stand still around something you do not trust. She needed the job. Andre needed the inhaler. That math did not leave a lot of room for principles she could afford to say out loud. But she remembered every one of those small cruelties. People like Preston never understood that the people they treated as furniture were keeping score. The bus ride to the arena took 26 minutes. Simone spent most of it with her forehead against the cold window, watching the city slide by, running the same numbers she always ran. Andre had texted her from her mother's phone, because he did not have his own, a single line that said he loved her, and he was okay, and Grandma made soup. She read it 4 times. Her mother had driven in from out east to watch him for the long weekend, which was the only reason Simone could pick up the Thursday night shift at all. The extra hours mattered. December was coming, and December had Andre's birthday in it, and she had promised him something she was not yet sure she could pay for. The arena was already alive when she badged in through the staff entrance. The home team was playing a division rival, a marquee game, the kind that filled the building and stretched everyone thin. Her friend Deb, who had worked hospitality for 9 years and had seen everything twice, handed her a cup of water without being asked, and told her it was going to be a long one. Deb had a way of reading a night before it happened. She said the Crown Club was fully booked, every table, plus walk-in members, plus Preston in one of his moods, because a regional vice president from the league office was coming through, and Preston wanted the whole floor to sparkle. Simone tied on her apron and checked her section and got to work. By 7 o'clock the Crown Club was full. It was a beautiful room if you liked that kind of beauty, all pale marble and low gold light and a long glass wall that looked down on the court. The people in it were dressed the way people dress, when the clothes are the point. Simone moved through them the way she always did, quick and quiet and warm, refilling glasses, clearing plates, catching problems before they became complaints. She was good at being invisible and useful at the same time. It was a skill nobody taught you and nobody thanked you for. The man in the grey hoodie came in a little after the game started. He came up the members' stairwell, which was unusual because most people used the elevator, and he came in without the loud confidence that most Crown Club guests wore like cologne. He was tall. You noticed that first, even before you noticed anything else. The sheer height of him, and the width of his shoulders, and the way he seemed to take up space, without trying to. But everything else about him was quiet. Plain grey hoodie, zipper halfway, a dark cap pulled low, sneakers that had clearly been worn and loved. No watch worth mentioning, no entourage. He walked to the glass wall, found an empty stool at the standing rail, and set his forearms on the polished ledge and watched the game with a stillness that most people could not manufacture if they practiced for a year. Simone noticed him because she noticed everyone. She noticed the way he exhaled when he reached the glass, the long, slow breath of a man who had been carrying something all day and had finally found 2 hours to set it down. She thought, without any idea how right she was, that here was a person who just wanted to be left alone with the game. She understood that. She poured a glass of ice water and carried it over and set it on the rail beside him, and said, in the low, even voice she used for guests who wanted quiet, that she would be right around if he needed anything. He turned his head a few degrees and looked at her from under the cap and thanked her. 2 words, calm and certain. Then he went back to the game. That should have been the end of it. It was not, because Preston Vale had seen the whole thing from across the room, and Preston Vale had already made up his mind. He crossed the floor with the smooth, unhurried stride he used when he was about to enjoy himself. He stopped beside the man in the hoodie, and he stood a little too close, the way he did, and he let the silence sit for a moment so the man would feel it. Then he asked, in a voice pitched just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, whether the gentleman could produce his membership card. He said the word gentleman, the way some people say a word they do not mean. The man in the hoodie did not turn around right away. He watched the game a beat longer. Then he said evenly that he did not have a card on him tonight. He said it without apology and without heat, the flat, honest tone of a man who was not in the habit of explaining himself. Preston smiled. It was the smile Simone had learned to dread. He said that in that case he was afraid there had been a misunderstanding, that the Crown Club was a members-only space, reserved for a certain calibre of guest, and that perhaps the gentleman would be more comfortable in the general seating downstairs. He let his eyes move over the hoodie and the cap and the worn sneakers while he said it, slowly, so that everyone watching would understand exactly what he meant. He was not talking about a card. He was talking about the man. He had looked at Michael Jordan and decided he was the wrong kind of person for the room, and he was going to remove him, and he was going to enjoy the removing. The nearest tables had gone quiet. A woman in pearls looked away with the small, embarrassed smile of a person who does not want to see but cannot stop watching. A man in an expensive jacket smirked into his drink. The message moving through the room was old and ugly and unmistakable. Somebody who did not belong had gotten in, and order was being restored. Michael Jordan straightened up from the rail. He was a full head taller than Preston, and for a moment the size of him seemed to change the temperature of the room. But he did not use it. He did not raise his voice, or lean in, or do any of the things a smaller man might have done. He simply looked at Preston with a steadiness that would have made a more careful person nervous, and he said, quietly, that he had paid to be here, and he was not bothering anyone, and he would like to finish watching the game. And Preston, who could not hear the warning in a quiet voice, because he had spent his whole life only respecting loud ones, told him no. He said, with that thin, patient smile, that he would have to ask him to leave, and that if he preferred, security could help him find the exit. That was the moment Simone Carter stepped in. She did not plan it. If she had thought about it for even 3 seconds, about Andre and the inhaler, and the rent and the narrow margin she lived inside, she might have kept folding napkins and looked at the floor like everyone else. But she did not think about it. She just saw a man being humiliated for the crime of dressing plainly, and she heard her own mother's voice somewhere far back in her mind, the voice that had taught her that you treat the man in work boots the same way you treat the man in the corner office, because you never know which one is carrying the heavier load. So she stepped between them, gently, the way you step into a room where someone is sleeping, and she said to Preston that it was all right, that the gentleman was a guest of hers, that she would take care of him, that there was no need for any of this. She said it warmly, giving Preston an easy way out, a door he could walk through where nobody had to lose. She was trying to save the moment for everyone, including him. Preston did not want the door. Preston wanted the room to watch him win. He turned his thin smile on her, and he said, in the cold, smooth voice he saved for the people he considered furniture, that she did not decide who was a guest of the Crown Club, that she was hired to carry trays and refill glasses and nothing else, and that if she wanted to keep doing even that, she would step aside and return to her station immediately. He said the word immediately the way a man drops something he expects to shatter. Simone did not step aside. She looked at Preston, and she looked at the man in the hoodie, who had not asked her for anything, and she made a decision that she would turn over in her mind for the rest of her life. She said quietly that she was not going to stand there and help throw out a paying customer who had done nothing wrong, and that if being decent to a stranger was against the rules, then the rules were wrong. The room was silent now. Even the game seemed far away. Preston Vale did not hesitate. He told her, in front of the man she had defended, in front of the woman in pearls and the man with the smirk and the whole gleaming room, that she was done. Not suspended, done. He told her to hand in her apron and clear out her locker and be gone before the fourth quarter. He said it with the satisfied precision of a man who believed he had just protected something important. He straightened his jacket. He had won, or so he thought. Simone did not argue. Somewhere in the back of her mind she had known, from the second she opened her mouth, that this was how it might end. She reached behind her and untied her apron, and she folded it in half and then in half again, taking the time to fold it neatly with both hands, the way her mother had taught her to fold things properly, even when the world was coming apart. She set it on the edge of a table. She looked at the man in the hoodie for just a moment, long enough to give him a small nod, the kind that says, "Do not worry about me," and then she turned and walked toward the service door with her chin level and her eyes forward. She passed close to Michael Jordan on the way out. He was watching her go with an expression she did not have the time or the context to read. Still and careful, and something else underneath it that she could not name. She did not know that the something else was the beginning of the rest of her life. She did not know a great many things yet. What none of them knew, what Preston Vale least of all knew, was that the head of Arena Security, a 54-year-old man named Earl Bishop, who had worked in that building since the week it opened, had been standing near the elevators for the last 4 minutes. He had recognized the man in the grey hoodie almost immediately, because it was his job to recognize him, and because he had walked him quietly through this building more than once. Earl had stood very still and watched the whole thing unfold, waiting, the way a man waits when he already knows how a story ends, and is only curious to see who will figure it out first. Earl Bishop crossed the floor now. He did not go to Preston. He went to the man in the hoodie, and he lowered his voice, and he asked if everything was all right, sir, and he used the word sir the way you use it for a person you mean it about. And Preston, hearing that word, feeling something shift in the air the way a barometer feels a storm, turned to look. Michael Jordan reached up and took off his cap. The change in the room was not loud. It moved in a wave, table by table, as recognition arrived, and it arrived the way water finds the lowest ground, unstoppable and quiet. The woman in pearls put her hand to her mouth. The man with the smirk set down his drink very carefully, as if it had suddenly become fragile. Somebody near the glass wall said the name out loud, softly, the way you say something you cannot quite believe, and then the name was everywhere, moving from mouth to mouth, and the whole gleaming room understood at the same instant what it was looking at. Preston Vale understood last, which was fitting, because Preston Vale was always the last to understand anything that threatened the story he told himself. He had been director of guest experience at Crown Point Arena for 6 years. In those 6 years he had smoothed over 100 complaints and flattered 1,000 important people, and built himself a comfortable little kingdom on the club level, and he had come to believe that the kingdom was real, and that he was its rightful king. He was, by his own estimation, a man who did not rattle, but standing there in the middle of the Crown Club, watching Michael Jordan set a plain dark cap on the marble rail and turn to look directly at him, Preston Vale rattled all the way down to the floor. There was a half-second where his mind simply refused the information, the way a machine freezes when it is asked to do two impossible things at once. Then it landed, all of it, at once. Michael Jordan, the majority owner of the team. The man whose name was on the deed of this building, this floor, this lounge, this very rail, and every inch of marble that Preston had just used to humiliate a stranger and fire a good woman for the sin of kindness. The man he had offered to have escorted to the exit of his own arena. Preston opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Earl Bishop said nothing either. He had done what he came to do. He stood with his hands at his sides, a big calm man who had seen 1,000 things come and go in that building, and he watched Preston Vale discover the size of his mistake. Michael Jordan did not raise his voice. That was the thing about him in a moment like this. The silence did the work. He looked at Preston for a long moment, 4 full ticks of the clock on the far wall, and when he finally spoke, it was not loud and it was not cruel, and it did not need to be either of those things. He asked where she was. The woman Preston had just fired. He asked it quietly, and he asked it as if it were the only question in the room that mattered, because to him it was. Preston's voice came back in pieces. He started to talk about policy, about the standards of the club, about how he could not have known, about how the employee had been insubordinate in front of guests. He reached for all the smooth, practiced language he had used 100 times to make himself sound reasonable. Michael Jordan held up one hand. Just one hand, barely to the height of his shoulder, the smallest possible gesture. Preston stopped. That woman, Michael said, speaking slowly and clearly enough for the whole silent room to hear, was the only person on this floor tonight who treated me like a human being. He said that she had stepped in front of a stranger to protect him, knowing it might cost her the job she plainly needed, and that the very first thing Preston had done when she did it was to make sure she paid for it. He looked at Preston with a directness that did not require any volume at all, and he said that a man could learn everything he needed to know about someone by watching who they choose to be kind to when they think no one important is looking. Preston Vale had no smooth language left. The kingdom had dissolved under his feet, and he was standing on nothing. Michael Jordan turned away from him then, which was its own kind of verdict, and he asked Earl Bishop to catch the woman before she left the building. Simone was almost to the staff exit on the ground level when Earl found her. He put a hand on her shoulder, not grabbing, just landing there gently, the way a hand lands when it needs to stop somebody from walking out of the rest of their life. He told her to hold on a minute. She turned around with the face of a woman who had already processed the loss and moved on to the practical arithmetic of what came next. How to tell her mother. Whether the hours she had already worked would still be paid, whether she could find something else before December. Earl told her that the gentleman upstairs wanted to speak with her. She asked which gentleman. Earl almost smiled. He said the one she had just gotten herself fired to protect. And then, because he was a kind man, and he could see the fear starting in her eyes, he told her who that gentleman actually was. Simone stared at him. She watched the information arrive, and she did not entirely believe it. She said the name back to him as a question, and Earl nodded. She was quiet for a moment, and then, very carefully, the first thing out of her mouth was not about herself. She asked if the man was all right, whether Preston had gotten to him too badly before she stepped in. Earl Bishop looked at her for a long second. A single mother who had just lost her job, and the first thing she asked about was whether the man she helped was okay. He said the man was just fine, thanks to her. They found Michael Jordan in a quiet alcove off the club level, away from the tables, his cap back on now, anonymous again to anyone who had not been in the room. Preston Vale was standing a careful distance away, with the specific posture of a man whose whole world had shifted under him, and who had not yet decided what to do about it. Michael turned when he heard them coming. He looked at Simone for a moment without speaking. In the better light of the alcove, she could finally see his face clearly, the face she had seen 1,000 times on posters and screens and the side of a cereal box when she was a girl, the face that belonged to the man whose team played in this building. She felt very small and very tired and very aware of the apron she was no longer wearing. He asked her name. She told him, Simone Carter. He asked if she had children. She said yes, a son, Andre, he was 8. He asked how long she had worked here. She said 4 months, and then, after a small pause, she said she supposed it was 4 months and 1 night now. Something moved in Michael Jordan's eyes at that. Not quite a smile. Something quieter, something that recognized itself. He turned to Preston Vale. Preston had been rebuilding his speech the entire time. In the architecture of his mind, all the reasonable phrases about standards and insubordination, and how none of this would have happened if the employee had simply followed instructions. He had used versions of that speech his whole career, and it had always worked, because he delivered it with a calm authority that made other people doubt themselves. He started it now. He got about 4 words in. Michael Jordan looked at him, and he did not hold up his hand this time. He just let the silence fall, and the silence was heavier than any words Preston could have said. Then he told Preston evenly that he was not going to stand there and tell him how to do his job, that it was not his style. He said only that he wanted to be clear about one thing. He said that what had happened on that floor tonight, all of it he had seen with his own eyes, from the inside, as the man on the wrong end of it, and that a person does not get to hide behind the word policy when what they were really doing was deciding on sight who counts as a person. He let that sit. Then he turned his back on Preston Vale for good. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and took out a plain white business card. He held it out to Simone. She took it with a hand that was not quite steady. On one side there was a phone number. On the other side, 3 words in small clean type. Call me tomorrow. Michael Jordan pulled his cap a little lower, and he thanked her again, and he told her to get home safe to her son. Then he walked back toward the glass wall to watch the last of a game he had come here to watch in peace. Earl Bishop fell into step a couple of paces behind him, not because he was a bodyguard, but because some things a man does out of pure respect. Simone stood in the alcove holding a business card and trying to understand what had just happened to her life. Here is the thing about Preston Vale, and it matters because it decided everything that came after. He was not a man who learned quickly from being wrong. He was a man who, the instant he was caught being wrong, began building a new version of events in which he had not been wrong at all. It was a reflex, deep and practiced, the kind that grows in a person who has spent years being the most powerful figure in most of the rooms he stands in. By the time he drove home that night, he had already rebuilt it. Standards existed for a reason. The employee had contradicted a director in front of guests, and that could not be allowed, regardless of who the guest turned out to be. If anything, he told himself, the fact that the man was the owner only proved how important it was to keep the floor tightly controlled. He composed an email to the arena's human resources office at 11:40 that night, careful and neutral, full of words like conduct and insubordination and standards, documenting a defensible decision. He did not mention Michael Jordan by name. He referred to him as a guest. He went to sleep believing he had handled a difficult situation correctly. He was wrong, and the proof was already moving. Because Earl Bishop, before he clocked out that night, had gone down to the security office on the ground floor and pulled the footage from the Crown Club cameras, the wide angle that covered the glass wall and the standing rail, the whole span of it, from the moment the man in the hoodie walked in to the moment Simone Carter folded her apron and walked away. He watched all of it, every second, a clean, unbroken record of a woman stepping in front of a stranger to protect his dignity and being fired on the spot for it. Nobody had told Earl to pull that footage. He did it because he was 54 years old, and he had watched Preston Vale operate for 6 years, and he knew that in a building like this, a record was not optional. It was survival. He saved the file, he labelled it plainly, and he sent a copy to a single private email address, the one printed on a card Michael Jordan had handed him years earlier, after Earl had quietly managed a delicate situation during a private ownership meeting. Michael had given him the card and told him that if anything ever came up that he should know about, to use it. Earl had never used it before that night. He used it now. The message had no subject line and 4 short sentences. The attachment was the footage, time-stamped and untouched. By the time Preston Vale was still writing his careful email, Earl's message had already been read. Simone did not sleep much that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the business card face up in front of her and her mother across from her in a robe, a cup of tea going cold between them, and she told the whole thing from the beginning. The grey hoodie, Preston's smile, the room going quiet, the apron folded in half and then in half again. Her mother listened without interrupting, the way she always had, and when Simone finished, she reached across the table and put her hand over her daughter's hand and said only that she had done the right thing, and that whatever came next, she had done the right thing. That was all she said. It was enough. Simone called the number at 9 the next morning. It rang twice. A calm-voiced man answered, not Michael Jordan, an assistant named Theo, who told her that Mr. Jordan was expecting her call and asked whether she could come to an address in the South Park area at 2 that afternoon. She said yes. Then she sat very still for a while, and then she woke Andre up gently and told him that today they were going to take a little drive and that he should wear his good shirt. The address turned out to be a low, quiet office building, set back from the road behind a stand of bare oak trees, the kind of building that did not announce itself, that could have been anything or nothing. There was no sign out front. Simone sat in her aging sedan in the parking lot for 4 full minutes with Andre buckled in the back, before she trusted her legs to carry her inside. Theo met them at the door and led them down a short hallway into a room with a long table and tall windows, and 3 people already seated, and one of them stood up when she walked in. Michael Jordan stood up. He was dressed the same as the night before, a plain hoodie, no suit, no performance of importance. He stood, and it was a small thing, but Simone would think about it for years, the deliberateness of it, a man who could have stayed in his chair and chose not to. He looked at Andre and asked him if he liked basketball, and Andre, who had gone completely silent with awe, managed to nod, and Michael told him there was a boy, his age job, in the room next door watching the game tape from last night if he wanted to see it, and Theo took Andre by the hand, and the boy went, wide-eyed, and the adults sat down. The other 2 people at the table were a woman named Yvonne Prescott, who ran the education programs for Michael's foundation, and a man named Devon Marsh, who was there from the team organization. Michael asked Simone if she wanted water. She said yes, because she did not know what else to say. She put both her hands flat on the table because she did not know what to do with them. Michael told her he had watched the footage. She nodded. He said he wanted to ask her something, and he wanted her to answer honestly, not the way she thought he wanted to be answered. Then he asked her, when she stepped between him and Preston, whether she had known who he was. Simone said no. She said she had not had the faintest idea. She had thought he was just a man who wanted to watch a game in peace, and was being treated badly for how he was dressed. Michael nodded slowly and asked her, then, why she had done it, knowing what it might cost her. She thought about the question honestly, because she wanted to give him the real answer and not the polished one. She said that her mother had raised her to believe that you treat the man in work boots the same as the man in the corner office, because you never know which one is carrying the heavier load. She said that she had seen him being made small for no reason, and that she could not stand there and be part of it, and that some things cost more to watch than they cost to stop. She said that was the whole reason. There was not any more to it than that. Michael Jordan was quiet for a moment. He repeated the last part back softly, almost to himself. That was the whole reason, as if he were filing it somewhere important. Then he nodded to Yvonne Prescott. Yvonne opened a folder and slid a document across the table and explained it in clear, unhurried language while Simone read along. The foundation ran a support program for working parents raising children alone in the Charlotte area, families demonstrating character and financial need. It covered a great deal. A monthly stipend designated for medical costs, which meant Andre's inhaler and every refill after it, handled not as charity, but as something owed to a household doing everything right with too little. A full paid enrollment in the after-school program she had been stretching to afford, and a dedicated college fund opened in Andre's name that afternoon that the foundation would add to every year until he was grown, so that whatever that boy decided to become, the money would not be the thing that stopped him. Simone read the document twice. Her hands were not entirely steady. She looked up and said she did not understand why he was doing this. Michael leaned forward slightly. He said that a long time ago, when he was young and nobody yet, before any of the rings or the records, somebody had shown him a plain ordinary kindness at a moment when it would have been easier to look away. He said that person had no idea who he would become. They just saw a kid who needed something and gave it to him and asked for nothing back. He said he had spent a long time trying to pay that debt forward, and that the hard part was never the money, it was finding the right people to give it to. He looked at her steadily and said that she was the right person. Then Devonmarsh spoke for the first time. He told her that the team organisation would be reaching out separately, that her termination was already being reversed and struck from her record, that she was welcome back at the arena the moment she wanted it, and that if she preferred, there was an opening on the events coordination staff, salaried, with benefits, that they thought she would be very good at. He said it in the flat, careful tone of a man delivering a decision that had been made well above his level. Simone signed the document. Her signature was slow and deliberate. Her mother's handwriting, people always told her, which was the finest thing anyone had ever said to her about anything. On the way out, Michael walked her and Andre to the front step himself, Theo a discreet distance behind. They stood a moment in the pale November sun, the bare oaks above them. He crouched down to Andre's height and told him to take good care of his mother, because she was the kind of person the world did not make enough of. Then he stood, and he put his hand briefly on Simone's shoulder, not grabbing, just landing there, present and certain. He told her not to let anyone ever again make her feel small for being decent, and that decency was the rarest currency there was, and she was rich in it. Simone drove home with the signed papers on the passenger seat, and Andre asking 100 questions from the back, and she did not turn on the radio. She just drove and let the city move past the windows, and thought about rope lines and marble floors, and the strange way that certain moments in a life stay invisible right up until the second they turn out to be everything. As for Preston Vale, the morning after the incident he arrived at Crown Point Arena at his usual time, coffee in hand, the confident stride of a man at peace with his choices. What he was not ready for was the message waiting in his inbox from a senior vice president of the organisation, sent before dawn, asking him to come directly to the executive floor upon arrival. Not to his own office, directly to the executive floor. The meeting lasted less than an hour. Preston walked in with his standards and his language about insubordination. He walked out with none of it, because the senior vice president had watched the footage, the same clean, unbroken footage that Earl Bishop had sent up the chain, and had spent 20 minutes that morning on the phone with someone from the ownership group. The footage made the situation very plain. The phone call made the response very plain. Preston Vale was placed on immediate leave pending a full review of his conduct, a review that would include, the vice president told him, interviews with the staff who had worked under him for the last 6 years. Preston tried his speech one more time. He got through a sentence and a half. The vice president held up a hand, not unkindly, but with a finality that ended the conversation. She told him that he had humiliated a paying guest and fired a single mother for showing that guest basic human kindness, and then he had gone home and written an email at midnight, trying to prove he was right, and that none of that was a standards problem. It was a character problem. What the staff interviews turned up over the following 2 weeks was not a portrait of a monster. It was something sadder and more common than a monster. It was the portrait of a man who had confused authority with correctness for so long that he had lost the ability to tell the two apart. One after another, employees described the same pattern: a smooth cruelty aimed downward and a smooth flattery aimed upward, a habit of humiliating the people he had decided did not matter. A coat check attendant remembered being dressed down for helping a lost elderly couple find their seats. A young server remembered being mocked for the way he spoke. None of them had forgotten. People like Preston never understood that the people they treated as furniture were keeping score the whole time. The review ended in the second week of December. Preston Vale was let go. He did not go quietly at first. He spoke to a lawyer. He used the phrase wrongful termination. He drafted a long letter defending himself, and somewhere in the middle of writing it, late one night in the silence of his own home, he read back over what he had written, and for the first time in a very long time he read it not as a man defending himself, but as a man finally tired enough to see himself clearly. He put the letter in a drawer. He called the lawyer in the morning and told him to stop. 3 weeks later he drove to a community centre on the north side of the city and asked, with no appointment, whether Simone Carter was there. She had started volunteering there on her days off, helping run a program for working parents, the same kind of program that had lifted her. She came out to the lobby and looked at him with an expression that was careful but not closed. Preston had prepared something to say, and standing in front of her, it dissolved into something simpler and harder and far more honest than anything he had said in years. He told her he had been wrong, that what he did to her was wrong, and he was sorry. Simone looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her mother's hand over hers at the kitchen table. She thought about a folded apron and a business card, and a man who stood up when she walked into a room. And she told him that she accepted his apology, and that she hoped he meant it, because a person could still change if they truly wanted to. She meant it. That was all either of them needed. A little over a year later, Simone Carter was the events coordinator for community programs at Crown Point Arena. She had a salary now, and health insurance, and a small office with a window and a drawing Andre had made taped to the wall. She was the person the organisation sent when a school group came through, when a family who had been through something hard needed a night to forget it, when someone arrived at the building, unsure whether they belonged. She had a way of making people feel welcome. It was a gift that had finally found a place that valued it. Andre was 9 now, and his cough was gone, because the medicine that kept it away was simply always there now, the way it should always have been. There was a college fund with his name on it that grew a little every year. On the refrigerator at home, there was a new photograph, held up by a little sun-shaped magnet, of Simone at her desk on her first day, smiling in a way her mother said she had not smiled in years. And once, on a quiet night late in the season, Simone looked up from the club level and saw a tall man in a grey hoodie and a dark cap come in through the members' stairwell and take a stool at the standing rail by the glass wall, alone, wanting nothing but 2 hours and a game. She did not make a fuss. She poured a glass of ice water and carried it over and set it on the rail beside him, and told him she would be right around if he needed anything. He turned his head a few degrees and looked at her from under the cap, and this time he smiled, and he thanked her by name. Here is what that cold November night taught everyone who was paying attention. The way a person treats someone who can do nothing for them is the truest thing you will ever learn about that person. Preston Vale looked at a plainly dressed man and a hard-working mother, and saw two people who did not matter, and it cost him everything. Simone Carter looked at a stranger being made small, and saw a human being who deserved a chair and a kind word, and it changed her whole life, and her son's life after her. Kindness is not weakness, it is not naive, It is the quiet strength of a person who has decided that other people are real. And greatness, the kind that lasts, was never really about the rings or the records or the name on the building. It was about a man who could have arrived through the front doors with the whole city watching, and instead chose to come in quietly and remembered exactly what it felt like to be treated as though he did not belong, and used everything he had built to make sure one good woman never had to feel that way again. Dignity is not a privilege, it is a basic right. If this story moved you, take a moment to remember someone who showed you a kindness before they knew who you would become, and then go be that person for somebody else. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments about a time a stranger's small kindness changed your day. Your story might be the one that reminds someone else to look up and see the people around them. This story is a work of fiction. Michael Jordan is a real person, but every event, character, conversation, and situation in this narrative is entirely imaginary, created for storytelling and to explore dignity, grace under pressure, and quiet courage. Nothing here represents actual events or should be read as fact.